Happy New Year! Some of us love the start of a new year. We relish the potential and opportunity that lies ahead. But for others, Happy New Year is anything but. Facing a new year feels like standing in mental quicksand, our fears and phobias sucking us into anxiety and inaction. Welcome to the Tailoring Talk Magazine, the magazine-style podcast that blends business, personal development, pop culture, fashion and tech with a dash of style. I'm your host, Roberto Revilla, owner of Roberto Revilla London Suit and Shirt Makers. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're listening to the audio version of this episode, please help the show by giving a rating and review. On YouTube, you can help us by hitting like on this video and subscribing to our channel. Do you have New Year fear? Let's punch fear in the face with today's guest, Christopher Paul Jones. Christopher is Harley Street's leading phobia specialist. Clients come from all over the world to see him at his phobia clinic, including Hollywood actors and award nominees, models, musicians, presenters, and celebrities. Christopher is here to take the legs out from under any issue you might have, leading you to enjoy your life free of the things you once found terrifying. Christopher Paul Jones, welcome to the show. I've been so excited to meet you, and what a perfect time to have you on Tailoring Talk. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and thanks for having me.
So I think I partly fall into this category because I kind of start feeling anxious towards the end of the year. So I'm kind of optimistic in November, and then my anxiety and so on just starts to creep in December. And then by the 1st of January, I'm just completely, everybody's having fun on New Year's Eve. If I'm sitting in a corner, basically shredding toilet paper or whatnot, and sort of starting to worry about the next year. I think people kind of use that anxiety in one of two different ways. They either use it to push through and to kind of march forward with the things that they have to do and the things they want to achieve. And others, basically, like I said at the start, mental quicksand, they literally just sink into all of that anxiety and so on. Now, people might assume, let's just get to know you first of all, because I've never met you before, and neither has...
No, I've never met you either.
So, bit of getting to know. Have you always been a fearless person? What were you?
No, not at all. I was the polar opposite. I was scared of everything. So the main ones were public speaking. I was terrified of, ironically. So I'm here now. Flying was a big one. Insects, spiders, things like that. Wasps. Had a lot of social anxiety, a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, those kind of things. So I had quite a lot of issues, which is why I kind of set down this path, and really it was for my own personal development to improve myself, and then I started helping other people, and now I'm 15 years later I'm here now, working with people from all around the world. So
I remember one of my biggest phobias, aside from a few of the things that you mentioned, was heights. I'm going to tell this story now, and then I'm just going to leave it there for you to come back to later. We started refurbishing a house about 5 years ago. Long story short, builders let us down quite badly. Then COVID struck and nobody wanted to take it over. And either we went bankrupt with this thing, or we basically rolled our sleeves up and just learned how to become builders, and we did it ourselves. Now, my fear of heights was so great, I couldn't even go 3 steps up a step ladder. It used to really frustrate my dad no end, because he was a compulsive DIYer. And so he'd be up on a roof and I'd be on the ladder just below, and he'd say, right, come up here and pass me these tools. And I just couldn't do it. I would just shake uncontrollably. And I couldn't even tell you what exactly it was, why I was that frightened. And I was just paralyzed with fear. Fast forward however many decades to where I am now in my life, I'm just not scared at all. And
brilliant.
I think the break point happened one night. It was snowing, gale force winds, all that sort of thing. The covers had blown off of our window openings. I came at sort of 1 a.m, and without thinking about it, because the priority was I needed to protect the property, I ran up a scaffolding ladder 3 stories up to the roof, got on with what I had to do, and then I scarpered back down again. It was at that point, when I got to the bottom of the ladder, I realised what I'd done, and I thought, actually, it wasn't that bad. I will leave that there with you. I guess the starting point, Christopher, is a fear and a phobia the same thing, or are they two different things?
So this is a question I get asked a lot as well. The definition I would give is a fear is something that you dislike but you can do. So, I'm a bit nervous of this thing. And with those things, you can sort of expose yourself and get better at it. And the more you do it, the better you become. Technically, a phobia is when you see that thing or think about that thing and instantly go into reaction. So it's a kind of hardwired response, and no amount of sort of mental willpower is necessarily going to change that. And so it requires a different approach. But I would say one's a lesser version of the other, in the same way that sort of PTSD is probably a more extreme version of a phobia, in that you have a specific trigger event, and then you're constantly reliving that. With PTSD, you're actually often having flashbacks to that thing. So they're all very similar. I mean, anxiety is also similar. A lot of people that have general anxiety also have phobias, but anxiety tends to be more based on a fear of the future. Yes, it's happened from the past, but it's a anticipation of what might happen. It's constantly thinking the worst case scenario, and your brain subconsciously is trying to keep you prepared, but of course all it does is feed the very thing you don't want, and you end up sort of stuck in this spiral.
Is because you've developed a system that's very, very different from the way that other therapists might deal with this sort of area of,
Yes.
I guess you call it psychology, right? Well, firstly, describe your system, the integrated change
Right.
system, gave it away, and how that approach differs. Because you see, I mentioned celebrities and the kind of
Mm.
obvious thing. You've also one of your clients is my favorite money penny. We just did our Bondathon, and we've
Oh,
just been
yes.
sort of, we didn't do, we watched all of the James Bond movies from beginning to end 1 month at a time, and we've just been doing our sort of celebration of that. And I picked Naomi Harris as my favorite money penny. So if I was 007 in real life and I had my pick of any of the money pennies, I'd want
That
Naomi
would be
Harris
your
as
one.
my money penny. Yeah, yeah, because I just think she'd keep me in check, kick my ass, all that sort of thing. So that's pretty awesome. But you also look after people from, sort of quote unquote normal walks of life, and
Oh, yeah.
people who have phobias from fear of heights to fear of flying. Fear of public speaking is obviously a big one for a lot of people. And I always wonder, you've then got fears that
Yeah.
are quite common: fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of flying, etc. But then you could have five individuals that are all scared of flying, but they're all different individuals.
They're also different
Now,
phobias, but we'll come on to that in a second.
okay, so how do you even begin to start untangling all of
Right.
this with
Yeah.
people?
Well, look, before we go there, let me explain sort of what causes a phobia, if that's helpful. I don't know
Yeah,
if that'd be useful.
absolutely.
So, do you know of Pavlov and his dogs? Or do you know Pavlov's dog? So,
Yeah, yeah.
Ivan Pavlov, what he did, you ring a bell, feed a dog. Ring a bell, feed a dog, ring a bell. Eventually, the dog salivates like it's about to be fed. Now, the bell has nothing to do with food, but the two have become linked. And so, us as human beings do the same thing. You kiss the love of your life, there's a piece of music playing, and you hear that tune a year later, 2 years later, 10 years later, and if the emotions are strong enough, you're back there. You're feeling all those happy feelings, right? Conversely, love of your life is breaking up with you. Piece of music playing, hear that tune 2, 3, 10 years later, you'll be back there crying. And so taste, smells, sights trigger us all the time. Now, what's happened with a phobia? At some point in your past, your brain has gone, this thing equals danger. And so that can be, so with the case of flying, that can be very literal. You're 8 years old, you're on a plane, it's turbulent, and your brain goes, never again. Avoid. This is dangerous. Even though turbulence isn't particularly dangerous to a plane, you feel it is. Or you get up and public speak. This was my one. You get up and public speak, you stutter over the words, everyone at school laughs at you, and you go, that public speaking is close to death, And so we create these links in our mind. They're not logical, they're not rational, but then emotions never are. And then you do what exactly you're supposed to do if you're in danger. You're going to fight, flight, or freeze. So you want to punch it, you want to run from it, or you want to play dead. So that's a little bit about how a fear gets created. So in order to, the best way to let it go, and although I have my own system, it is drawn on what I found the best of what worked from lots of different sort of intervention therapies. It's less about sitting talking about the issue, although there is a place for that, but it's much more about how you turn off that Pavlovian bell, how you find those triggers and change them. And so, for example, you're talking about something like fear of flying. Now, for some people, a fear of flying is a fear of heights. For some people, a fear of flying is a fear of being trapped. For some people, it's a fear of crashing, obviously, but not as many as you'd think. For some people, it's a fear of the fear itself. Well, what if I panic? What if I get anxious and everyone stares at me, or I start doing something ridiculous? So it's a fear of the future or loss of control. So there's many different fears that can make up one phobia. And so no two people have the same phobia, even if all the same triggers, I should say, even if it's the same phobia. And so you have two people talking and they go, oh yeah, I have a fear of public speaking. Oh, me too. But the triggers may be very different. However, the system is very similar. So you find those triggers. And I say they can be very literal. So let's go with the flying. It could be a turbulent flight when you were young. It could just be something similar. You went on a roller coaster and got scared. And so it becomes a fear of the movement. And whenever you have that similar movement, you create that fear. Or a fear of being vulnerable or exposed, fear of not being able to get away, claustrophobia. So it's finding those triggers and it's letting go of the analytical mind. So that's really the first step. It's looking at what is it from my past that has created this. Now, some of these things may have happened so long ago that you don't consciously remember. But you have another part of you, what you might call your unconscious, subconscious, emotional mind, inner child, whatever you call that, which holds every thought, every feeling, and every memory that's ever happened to you, both good and bad. And so when you do certain processes, mindfulness, meditation, self-hypnosis, whatever you want to call it, but certain techniques to get out of your head, you can then, it becomes a lot clearer to get to the problem. So those are the first two steps. It's getting clear on what it is, how you do your phobia, because a lot of people treat their emotions like a cold, like an illness. Or what if I get anxious? Rather than, wonderful, how do I get anxious? Because you're painting a movie in your mind, you're saying something to yourself, you're feeling a certain way, you're breathing a certain way. So there's always a sequence you're running to be happy, sad, calm, or relaxed. And it's kind of working out that sequence and then how do we unravel that to change how we feel? So those are kind of the first few steps in looking at that.
But just even as you said that, I realized that I'm quite a reactive person. So when something's happening, I don't breathe.
Yes.
My breathing is very, very quick and sharp. And it's only after the event has passed that I then realize I'm out of breath. I don't give myself time to think. It's just react, react, react. And then afterwards, I'm like, okay, next time I get into that situation, maybe what I should do is just pause and just focus back on my breathing and so on.
Exactly.
And then I'll be a lot calmer, and then I can handle it much better next time. Again, is looking at the physical aspect of what you do as well, just how a person reacts to any given situation.
Yes, well, if you tend to be very reactive, if you tend to, again, every behavior has its benefit and its consequence. So, and the best thing, so for example, if we learn how to go, okay, go, get things done, high energy, that will serve you in one area of life, achieving in work, life. It's less helpful when you're trying to do a yoga class or something, when you're trying to relax and enjoy yourself. And it's always interesting when I work with type A personalities because they come in and go, right, okay, you're the man to do it. Let's get rid of my phobia like that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, great, you're passionate, but just, the more you get, trying to tackle your tension from a place of tension isn't necessarily the best way in that circumstance. So everything is context, but it's often because, as I say, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. Our stress response is either to avoid it or to kind of run away or to power through and try and fight. So if you're that kind of go-getter, you tend to go more to fight mode. That doesn't mean physically, or some people are quite hot-headed, but it does mean you want to do that. And really, the more flexible you can be, the more you can go, okay, serves me in this context, but not in this. The more freedom you have, the more choice you have. But yeah, taking time to step back and take a breath is always good. And the good question to ask yourself is, well, what am I trying to achieve here? What's my outcome? And if it's my outcome is to be relaxed, then maybe that, as I say, doing it from tension isn't the best thing. If it's to get things done, I mean, even then, there's something to be said for being in flow. So there's a lot of people, I'm kind of doing this out of order, but a lot of reasons people hold on to their fear. So they know the triggers, and there's various exercises, various processes to take out that emotional charge from the past. Sometimes that can be very quick. Sometimes people hold on to that, and they often hold on to that for a process, what's called secondary gain. Now, this is the benefit for having the issue. And if I was to say to most people, logically, what's the benefit for having a fear of heights, say, nothing. But at the emotional level, at the subconscious level, it's meeting a need. Most commonly, protection, safety, being prepared. And so, for example, if people go, okay, I need to be hypervigilant, I need to be on high alert all the time to solve problems, to get things done, for example. It's teaching your mind that that's not always the best way, even to get things done. And so the analogy I use is, if you're watching a movie and there's a samurai warrior there meditating under the tree, and the bad guy's riding to town, and he slowly takes a breath in, opens his eyes, puts his hand on his sword, and the movie cuts to commercial. When that movie cuts back, you're not there going, oh, he's so going to get his ass kicked. He was way too relaxed at that point, right? You think because he's calm under pressure, it makes him a bad. The same as the action hero, that goes, okay, this is what we're doing, guys, even if they're in danger. So that is a level of mastery that a lot of people don't have, of course. But it is realizing that it's going, well, I'm trying to achieve things. Is there a better way to do it that's going to be better for my health, my mindset, and all these other things? But with the most behaviors, there's a context where it serves you and a context where it holds you back.
That's it reminds me, someone that I spoke to, is probably someone that I interviewed ages ago on here, said another way to sort of consider when you're faced with a situation is to ask yourself, is this thing, is it going to kill me?
Yes.
Which is the most extreme question that you can ask, but the answer 99.99% of the time is no.
No, yeah.
Right.
Well, and the biggest phobias are not the biggest dangers. And so so let's say flying. Yeah, we've had a lot in the news recently about flying. However, there's how many car crashes happened in that place that time. And again, I'm not here to install more fears, you should be, but it is realizing statistically the reason planes make the news is because they are incredibly rare. However, and because we get, world news, we hear things halfway around the world. We don't hear about car accidents halfway around the world. But when people think about flying, majority, not every single person, majority of clients, they relax when the plane is coming into land because they go, it's nearly over. Yet statistically, it's not dangerous, but of all the most dangerous things, landing is the most dangerous. But of course, it's not about that. It's about how you feel. Same as spiders. As in England, you're pretty safe. There aren't many deadly spiders in England, if any, I think. Yet in Australia, you could almost justify it. Yet statistically, no more people are scared per square mile. There's no more scared in Australia or Africa than there are in England. So it's nothing to do with how dangerous it is. As you say, what's number one in public is public speaking. Top most lists of fears is fear of public speaking. And yet there isn't a circumstance where you're going to die. If you do a bad presentation, the worst thing that can happen is you feel a bit embarrassed. And yet, as I say, that's top of most people's fears. It's something about not being accepted by the group or being rejected by the tribe or something sort of ancestral. But in terms of physical danger, you're in none. And you always go, as you say, what's the worst case scenario? So that's my one. What's the worst thing that can happen? I might mess up. What's the worst thing about that? They'll think I'm rubbish at my job. What's the worst thing about that? I'll get fired. What's the worst thing about that? I might starve to death in the street. And you just go to these absurd conclusions, which is not going to happen. It's and again, often trying to use logic on an emotion isn't helpful, but it's good to challenge that and go, well, what is it really going on the inside? What is the belief I'm holding on to that's stopping me from letting go of this? And just one other thing on the speaking as well, it's self-feeding. The more you go, okay, I must do a good job. I mustn't mess up. I must make sure that everyone, because I don't want my boss to think I'm rubbish, or the clients to think I'm stupid or whatever. The more you do that, the more anxious you become, and the more likely you are to get stuck and mess up. The more you can go, it is what it is. Life goes on. There's always another day. The better you'll be at public speaking. And so sometimes the more you're trying it, as I said, it's the yoga analogy, trying to be tense from it, the more you're trying to combat it or fight it, the more you create the thing you don't want.
Yeah, because you're just loading, by telling yourself those things, you're just loading more and more onto your shoulders, more and more, what's the word, expectation or whatever. And you're setting your ceiling so high or so low for failure. That you're just not helping yourself. I mean, is the questioning as important at the end of whatever it is that you do? So let's take public speaking as an example, since we brought it up. It's a really weird one, because I was a drama and theatre arts student, so I was going on stage and performing in front of people and doing monologues, did a lot of Chekhov, lots of monologues, and then years later, I've just avoided public speaking in corporate life. And then a friend asked me at the beginning of the year, she was hosting an event, different speakers on talking about different aspects of personal development, and asked if I would get up stage to talk about style and how to dress
Hmm.
and how to present yourself, which is a thing that I can talk about for days on end because it's what I do every single day. I live, breathe it, it's my passion. And I said yes straight away. So that was my sort of step one to sort of overcoming this fear of getting up in front of people. Just say yes, because then you've got to do it and then you've got to deal
Yeah.
with it. When it got to the actual day itself, I was fully prepared. They called me on stage. And all I can remember, Christopher, is that within 5 minutes, water, all the fluid had drained out of my body. I was so dehydrated. I felt like I couldn't get words out of my mouth, like literally had gone to paper. I
Mm.
stopped during my intro to try and get water. There wasn't any water on the side for me. So I literally just went over to an audience member, half drunk cup of water, grabbed it and swigged it down. I was just desperate. And
Mm.
by the end of it, I'm thinking to myself, I've just completely bombed here. Like that was an absolute disaster. I never want to do it again. And then when I was asked almost immediately after I got off stage, "Are you okay?" I thought about it for a microsecond and I turned around and I said, "Yeah, but I want to do this again as soon as possible to stop
That's
myself
good.
from
Yeah.
sitting there
That's
with it."
good.
You know what I mean?
Getting back on the horse. Yeah. Yeah.
95% of me didn't want to get back on the horse. 95% of me is like,
Yeah.
just I just wanted to bury myself in a hole. And so, right, self-talk. Okay, tell yourself you want to do it again, even though you don't. And saying it out loud really, really helped. And then I didn't feel
Yeah.
so bad about it. So I'm guessing that the questioning of yourself afterwards is just as important as what you do at the beginning to actually.
Absolutely. Well, it's and you know, you make a valid point. It's what you do with what happens. So yes, it's the meaning you give these things. And I use this sort of analogy in the book. There's an old saying about, you know, twins that had a father who was an alcoholic. One's teetotal, one's an alcoholic, and they go to the one twin. How come you're an alcoholic? And he goes, well, how could I be any different? I watch my father. They go to the one who's teetotal. They go, how can I be any different? I watch my father. And so it's not about what happens, it is about what you do with it. And so, as you know, for you, you went, okay, could have done it better. Next time, you know, get back up. It's only going to get better. Other people, as you say, that fear is too much and they would shrink away. And of course, the more you avoid something, the more you make it a mountain, the more you create this unsurmountable goal. Because especially with anticipatory anxiety, which comes with a lot of fear of speaking, the worrying about it is worse than the thing itself. I mean, if it's the build up, you know, oh, I've got speech tomorrow, I've got this, I've got that. If you were just, oh, you're on, you'd have that, and then it would be dealt with for the most part, for the majority of people. So yeah, it is often how you interpret that, what you do with what you say to yourself. I mean, one of the things with speaking, for most people, the worst part is the walk up to the stage. You know, okay, I'm walking up, everyone's looking, okay, is my throat okay? Look. Afterwards, when you're getting the round of applause or people are coming up to you and going, oh yeah, that was interesting. Afterwards, you feel quite good. So it's also, when you think about the future, where are you focusing on? And it's a bit like the analogy with the gym. You know, if you've just come home from work and you're just like tired, it's cold out, whatever. But if you project yourself 6 months from now, when you've got that six pack, when you've got that look, you're going, oh yeah, I'll go. So often it's where your focus is, depends on your motivation as well, when you can see a
Yeah.
clear vision for how you want it. So yeah, it's what are the movies you're painting in your mind as well? What are you saying to yourself? Makes a big difference.
So I love what you did there because you've led me neatly into back to start of new year. I work with a lot of high performers in their corporate lives, maybe not so much in what we're just about to talk about. And I know a lot of you are listening, but you know, I tell you this all the time. We have the same conversation. Some of you have had the same conversation for 20 years. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get
Yeah.
myself into healthier eating habits. And then they get sort of about, I give most people 2 or 3 weeks before they fall off the wagon. Slightly different in that respect. I actually start off unoptimistic and I look at everybody else making these resolutions, especially nowadays. They post them on social media with all these airy fairy quotes and stuff. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, I want to take a pencil and stab you in the face. My wife says I'm a real Grinch at the start of the year. Now, the third Monday of the month,
Yeah.
Christopher, I'd never heard of Blue Monday until you told me. I've
Right.
done this many years of my life, and I'd never heard of it. And I think the reason why is because Blue Monday would generally fall roughly around the 20th to the 23rd of Jan-ish.
Hmm.
And my birthday's on the 30th. I love my birthday. So I think when everybody's going through this Blue Monday thing, I'm actually in a really good mood because Blue Monday means it's a week away from my birthday. I've given myself at least 2 or 3 days off, and I'm going to do all the things that I love to do. So let's talk about it.
Hmm.
It's apparently what, the most saddest time of the
Yeah,
year?
yeah. So basically, what's happened? So the Christmas decorations have gone down. All the parties have stopped. You know, your New Year's resolutions are often failing. The credit card bills just come in. So you know, it's cold, it's wet, it's damp, and so
You're
especially in
preparing
England.
yourself to do all the things that aren't fun, like
Yes,
eat vegetarian food
exactly. You've got to
and
try and stick to that
exactly no
detox, and yeah,
alcohol, no
yeah.
chocolate and sugar and all the stuff that makes you happy. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So all those things tend to hit, and so a lot of, so it's said, you know, it's the saddest time of the year or the most depressed time. But I think what's fascinating is, like everything, what we were just talking about, what are you feeding your mind with? And so if you're going, hey, my birthday's coming and I'm having time off and I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to, you know, have all this passion, it's very different than, gosh, I failed again, and at that gym I joined I haven't been to, and oh no, salad for lunch again. Yeah, whatever it is. And so it's again, it's what you're feeding your mind with and what you're making it mean. And so yeah, but it can be a very depressing time. I don't really think the labels are important. You know, it's, whenever it is, if you're getting down, whether it's January or February or summer, the question always is, well, there's something I'm focusing on to feel that way. There's an image I'm making in my mind. There's a feeling. There's a belief I have about that thing. And so, you know, let's bring it back to public speaking or any other thing. If I can't present like that expert public speaker, somehow I'm a failure, you know, rather than, all right, where was I last week? Where am I going? And just, you know, rather say, if there is someone who's a better speaker than you, go, great. Let me learn
Yeah.
from them. Let me take them to one side and go, well, what is it you're thinking about before you speak? How is it you use your voice and tonality, rather than just going, I'm not good enough, and I don't want people to see I'm not good enough. So that temptation to hide, which often comes with age as well, because we often get
Mm.
more of a fear of getting it wrong or not seeming good enough. And sometimes I think, you know, I think you were saying to me offline as well, there's this idea that once people get to a certain level, say they're CEO of a business, that they would be a brilliant public speaker. And they may be a brilliant speaker, but they don't think they are. And certainly they often have a lot of fear of messing up, because they're like, oh, what if, because again, it's that people have put me on a pedestal, and if they think I'm not perfect, then, you know, I'm going to feel like a failure. And so that anticipation, that thing they're putting in their mind is determining how they feel about themselves.
There's one key thing you said there, which was the word focus. It would be interesting to get your take on this. We're now post-pandemic. People spend a lot of time on social media, etc. And when you think about a lot of the resolutions that people set, they take all of this expectation off the shelf and load it onto their shoulders. So it kind of almost sets them up for a bigger fall, and it increases the pressure and so on, and then the anxiety starts to build. But the you see people posting on literally the first or second day of the year, you know, the mirror selfies and so on and so forth. And then those
Yeah.
same people by literally blue, well, let's just call it what it is, Blue Monday, they're not talking about all of that anymore. How big a deal is this whole social media influence now? Have you found that it's been even worse since COVID?
I mean, I don't think we really recovered from COVID in terms of certain mental health things like that. I mean, and again, I talk about this in the book, which is I noticed after COVID, a lot of people that had mild fears suddenly had massive fears, you know, so they hadn't flown in a couple of years, so they're suddenly terrified of flying. They hadn't presented in a couple of years, so they were suddenly terrified. Obviously, germ phobias and that was suddenly through the roof, because suddenly washing your hands 4 times a day was seen as normal, and, you know, locking yourself in the house, and especially in the early days of COVID, where we didn't know what we were dealing with. You're watching on the news going, the death toll is dun dun dun, and you know, I'm not saying that they were doing their job probably in terms of informing, but I'm sure if you had that with cancer or car crashes or anything every day on the news, it would put you in a state of fear. So you're in a state of fear. You've got no real outlet at the time. There's no gym to go to. You weren't even really allowed to go for walks properly. And so all this kind of fed that pattern. I do think, so it's hard to know where we are on that process, but I think social media, I do see a lot more anger as well, a lot more frustration. People are a lot less able to deal with the unknown. I think there's a lot more tension. But yeah, social media as a general, yes. Okay, for some people, putting that out there in the world, it's going to be me this year, is like is like being held to account, and it can actually motivate them. I think for a lot it can't, and I think obviously then there's the comparisons, and a lot of people use social media as a very specific snapshot of their best then. If of course they might, then of course they may be lying. They snuck into that car showroom and took a picture of them with that Porsche, and they go, "Look, it's my car." And people do that as well, just for clicks. But so I think there's a lot more comparison I see these days, especially in younger people. A lot more, well, I'm not thin enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough. And I say decisions from that place is very rarely motivating. It could be, but for the majority, it actually is, it makes people want to hide away rather than move forward. So I see that as an issue. And yeah, it is really looking into yourself and going, well, what is it that moves me forward and what is it that doesn't, and do less of what doesn't and more of what does. I mean, yeah, I can remember the other day I was like, I've got a couple of hours, I'll watch a movie. It's nearly bedtime, but maybe I'll watch a movie. It's a 2.5 hour movie. No, I need to go to bed before that. Let me just scroll on my phone. And of course, 3 hours of scrolling on my phone, watching, I don't even know what I watch. And that's the point. And so I'm going to bed too late, and going, you know what? I can maybe remember one funny video I saw. The rest, 2.5 hours of my life, it's nothing. I achieved nothing. I learned nothing. And I feel like I wasted it. And so that is the problem with social media. And again, you can use it for motivation. You could use it to, watch informative videos. There's a lot of good stuff as well, but it's being conscious about what you're using it for. I think that's the key. It's being aware of, am I just trying to check out and waste time, or am I actually using this productively?
Yeah. I want to talk about your book, Face Your Fears, which outlines your 7-step process to conquer phobias and anxiety. It's available on Amazon. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, both on the audio version and the YouTube version of this, people, so that you can get a hold of it. What was the process of writing that like? Because you've been helping people for years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you want to put it into a form that makes your method of helping people accessible to more people, because you can only help so many people in person, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was one of the so the two reasons for writing it is to reach more people, and because I noticed a big shift after lockdown. Now, it's interesting because just like public speaking, one of the reasons I was so terrified of public speaking was, as I said, when I was young, being made to get up and speak, stuttered over the words. Now, one of the reasons I did that is because I was labeled with dyslexia, which, again, our label was useful. I'm not a brilliant speller, not a brilliant reader either. So it was a novel thing for me to write a book. Dictation software helps, as is a good editor as well. But I mean, I talk about this, when people go to perfectionism, it's getting out of that need to be perfect first time. It's just getting the ideas down. So at first it was just load of ideas or dictating it, and then I had a page full of, maybe 10% legible text. But that's where you start from, and so then it was just condensing it down. But yeah, all the things I talk about in the book, I often talk about with my clients. The processes I use are the processes I use face to face. So in terms of what I know exactly what to talk about and what to do, it's giving it in a format that people can understand it as easily as possible. So yeah. I like to think I hope, well, I'll have a read. Give me your feedback.
I will.
It is also, actually, for those of you who don't like reading, it is actually available in Audible as well. So it's on Audible. So I actually prefer to listen. Maybe that's from the past, but also because I can multitask. So yeah. Now I've completely forgotten your question. What was your question?
What was the process of writing the book like for you? But I think you
kind of covered. I kind of touched on that a bit. Yeah, it's as I say, it's letting go of the need to be perfect first draft, and it's even if anyone wanting to write, if they have a message they want to give, it's even if you're not a good writer, we're living a good time where you can dictate it. You do have many different tools for helping you get your information out there, which is good. So, yeah.
Because I imagine, when someone comes in to see you and sits down with you, everything's instinctive, right? You instinctively know how to
Yeah.
connect with them, how to get into their heads, how to start to get what you need them to then begin to start helping them. When
Hmm.
you suddenly are sort of sitting at your desk or whatever in your study and you're like, right, I'm going to write this book. I need to start
Yeah.
somewhere. And suddenly you've got to start articulating your methods and everything that you do instinctively without even thinking about it most of the time. You suddenly got to start actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
I bet that's it gives you a lot of pause for thought.
Well, it is, and sometimes I remember someone saying this years ago about a great teacher isn't necessarily the person who's best at something, because, for example, someone who was like teaching you tennis or something, if they were a natural growing up, they don't actually know what it's like to struggle, So they just, oh, you just do this, this, and this. So actually being able to break it down into manageable steps for people is an interesting tool, and yeah, it's going. Well, I guess putting yourself in that place of where was I when I first heard this thing, when I first came across this idea or thought of this idea, what was I doing? Where would I have been? And so trying to talk to as many people as possible and where they might be on the different places in their journey is always a interesting thing. Putting yourself in other people's shoes, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Keeping an eye on time. So I want to
Yep.
get that some people will be watching this thinking, okay, fine, you two, this is great. Got to know you both a bit. I'll maybe have a look at Christopher's book, but it's the new year and I'm really, really struggling. What message would you convey to anyone who's listening who might not be able to access therapy and so on, who are struggling with fears or phobias that might be holding them back from achieving their goal this year?
Well, I mean, the first thing, get clear on what it is you're afraid of. Get clear on it. Say, let go of trying to analyze and just go, well, what is it? When do I do this? And what is going on inside? And learning to look inwards. That's, as I said before, that's the first step. Then it's realizing that you don't catch it, you do it, and there's something from your past. There's a belief, either directly or indirectly, that's creating that. And going, well, where, being curious about where that comes from. And then there are one very simple thing to do is take that thing that you're scared of. Especially if you sort of think in pictures, get that image of that thing you're scared of and just imagine if it was, in fact, if you've got anything you're scared of, I can talk you through this if you like. Yeah, you got anything that comes to mind?
Okay, so I'm not afraid of heights anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of spiders anymore. And the way I dealt with that one is I just figured that they're a lot bigger than I'm a lot bigger than they are.
Yeah.
So
they're more scared of you.
me. Exactly. Yeah. They eat flies. I can't stand flies. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Therefore,
I was just about to say that. That's exactly the quote that came into my head when you said that. Isn't that funny? Yeah.
When I was a kid, I don't know if you were the same, Christopher, because I know you had the same phobia.
Yeah.
But, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to cram homework, and there's a massive house spider. I would be petrified. Sorry, your question. What am I most scared? Do you know what? Public speaking. Getting up in
public
front
speaking.
Of people. Yeah, so that moment when you're at a conference or somewhere, or you're at a lecture, and then the person who's giving says, right, does anyone want to volunteer to come up and talk to the group? And then they point at you.
Right, so what's the feeling you have so imagine someone pointing at you and saying, who wants to come talk to the group? What do you feel in your body? Where do you feel that tension?
I feel it in my chest.
Right. And what are you picturing in your mind's eye? What are you imagining? What's the movie you paint?
Getting up in front of everyone and no words coming out of my mouth.
Right. And what are you saying to yourself in your head? What's this?
2 things simultaneously. Please pick me. Please do not pick me. Like, do not pick at me. I don't exist. Like,
oh, that's good. Right. So what you have there is what's called parts, where you're being pulled in 2 different directions. But so focus on the part that doesn't want to be picked. Focus on that voice for me. You got it? I want you to notice the tonality of that voice. Now, I want you to make that voice Mickey Mouse. Keep repeating it, but imagine it's Mickey Mouse saying it. Right. Great. Now, take that image of someone pointing at you, and I want you to shrink it right down, make it like black and white, tiny, and push it off into the distance like it's a tiny dot. Or imagine that like you're 10 times bigger than the person pointing at you, so you're kind of towering above it all, while Mickey Mouse is going, don't pick me. Now, if you'd imagine that while playing some Benny Hill music in your head or some circus music. So that's a very simple way of changing what you call the internal
as that
representations. Yeah.
visualization takes place, as it kind of goes black and white and then it becomes smaller, you kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, literally as you're piffing it off into the distance, you're then suddenly, if I put myself in a room like that, I'm thinking, this isn't that bad. Shrug my shoulders and just
Yeah.
get up and get on with it.
Yeah. And of course, there are deeper tools for changing that at its root cause and rewiring. But that's basically what we're doing. We're running a movie in our mind all the time, like the image we make, now it might not be a literal soundtrack, but it's an auditory, it's what we're saying to ourselves and what we're feeling. So we start scrambling them and moving them around. It's like these re-edits on YouTube, re-edits where people take like the It movie and they recut it like it's a family movie. So they'll put a soft soundtrack and take certain shots. That's what we're doing. We're painting a horror movie in our mind in order to be afraid. And so with the spider, what would happen if you made it small and tiny, or you put it with a little cane having a dance with a top hat, made it give it some googly eyes. If you played with the imagery, if you played with the sounds, if you played with the meaning, ultimately that then changes how you feel about it. And then it's about how do you recondition, create a positive Pavlovian response, if you like. How do you recondition positive associations to that thing rather than negative? And also what you call cognitive reframing, where what's the meaning you're giving it? And so one of the ones is, things like, oh, this plane's delayed, it means there's a problem, rather than this plane's delayed, isn't it good that they double, triple check, quadruple check everything to make sure we're safe? And so very often it's how do we change that meaning? And one of the I don't know if we have time for this, but one of the things that really helped me on the first step to being okay with being on stage was, what was the meaning I was giving it? Because when I first learned to public speak, I was awful. Like, I couldn't say my own name, and I'd stand up there, and my mentor takes me to one side and he goes, Chris, you're incredibly selfish. Excuse me. He goes, yeah, when you get up on stage, he says, you know who you're thinking about? Yourself. Will people judge me? Will I mess up? Whatever. That's all about you. He said, the second you get on stage and go, how can I serve this audience? How can I make a difference? How can I inspire them? He says, you'll find it very hard to be anxious. Now, he was doing what's called provocative therapy. He was deliberately sort of challenging me. But it's a good point. And I'm not saying someone who's scared of speaking is selfish, but we are looking inwards. In order to be anxious, we're looking at ourselves rather than what can I do for my audience? How can I inspire them? How can I make a difference? And so how you frame it, these things in your head, is also going to make a big difference.
You banished all my fears at Mickey Mouse. I'm going to use Mickey Mouse now with anything that's even slightly bothering me. That's absolutely fantastic. Christopher, thank you so much. Have you had fun?
You're very welcome.
Have you had fun today?
It's been amazing. Yes, it's been really good. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Definitely. If you'll have me grill you again, I would love to, because this is obviously such a diverse, complex subject and fascinating as well. Christopher, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining Christopher and I. If you'd like to connect with Christopher, or as a first step, read his book, Face Your Fears, 7 Steps to Conquering Phobias and Anxiety, then please head to the show notes. I'll have all the links there for you, and I'll connect you with Christopher as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please review, like, and subscribe. Most importantly, if you know someone who could get some help from what Christopher shared with us today, please send this episode on to them. Very important. Have an amazing, fearless 2025. Remember, just anything you're scared of, turn it into Mickey Mouse. And I will see you on the next episode.